Hello and welcome to The Last Mixtape. My name is Stephen White, and on this week's show we look into 5 years of Up the Flats, Gemma Dunleavy and gentrification of Dublin City. But first,
talking about my roots is literally, it's just part, I can't help it, you know. It's like roots that just keep growing and layers that have no end to them, and I'm just enveloped in this.
not my words, but the words of Gemma Dunleavy. Why, dear listener, and indeed dear viewer, was I just quoting acclaimed songwriter Gemma Dunleavy at the beginning of this week's show? Well, this week I thought we'd delve into the 5-year anniversary of her acclaimed EP, Up the Flats, as well as exploring what it means in Ireland in 2025 and the roots of gentrification, the Celtic Tiger and expression. Now, as always at the beginning of this week's show, I'll remind you that this is a music, arts and culture podcast and very much a vibes show. I should say at the very beginning of this show, I come from Waterford and a working class background in Waterford, but in no way is my experience similar to that of people growing up in the flats in Dublin or in the inner city. So I'm very much on the outside looking in, giving my take on how that music and how that environment informed the music of Gemma Dunleavy. So, with that said, let's delve in. Dublin's north inner city is lined with streets that carry history and memory, held and passed down through generations of tightly woven communities. Echoes move across concrete and pavement, calls from balconies, arguments from windows, music drifting from flat parties and car stereos as they speed past. Sandwiched between East Wall and North Wall, split between Upper and Lower, modern and old Ireland, Sheriff Street stands apart. A story often told from the outside in, it's a place burdened by classist clichés and a slow creep of gentrification that always follows close behind. Framed in headlines and newsreels that ignore context, flattening poverty into pathology, erasing the structural violence that holds so many people just beneath the surface. You can see it in the skyline. Cranes not crossed, casting shadows like vultures, ominously awaiting their next prey. But there are voices here. Luke Kelly's statue, depicting the booming tenor mid-voice, still watches over the streets he grew up in. And now Gemma Dunleavy sings from that very same place. She grew up among these bricks and stairwells. I engraved me name on the pillars of the arch, so that when I'd left, I'd always leave me mark. Gemma may have engraved her name on concrete, but those structures engraved themselves on her. However, as a century came to a close and the new millennium began to break over the horizon, the past would fall. In the name of progress, entire communities were dismantled and eventually demolished. St. Lawrence's Mansions, St. Bridget's Gardens, Phil Shanahan House, all torn down from foundations to wallpapered walls to fireplaces, reduced to rubble. Ballymun's Flats too, from Kind to Clark, Balcurris to Balbutcher, themselves immortalised in U2's Running to a Standstill, now flattened. Their story too, often told as failure, ignoring their community and their home. Gemma's music resists forgetting that place and time. In 2020, just before Up the Flats was released, I spoke to Gemma. She told me, I've been very protective of my upbringing because it's been shown in a bad light, but in reality, it's the best gift I could ever have got. That line always stayed with me. A refusal and a stand. A way to hold the truth of our community in both hands, even as others try to erase it. Few artists carry home the same way she does, note by note, beat by beat, voice by voice. When she sings about the flats as they were, she's still fighting for a community that survived the grasping, cannibalistic hunger of the Celtic Tiger. So why dive into Up the Flats 5 years later? Well, I thought it was very interesting in comparison to what we were talking about last week with CMAT and her brand new single Euro Country and the kind of the differences of experiences. I think that Up the Flats is an EP couched in that very thing. From its opening Phil Shanahan Soul, which is a recording of a family member talking about the flats and missing them and wanting them back. I think the EP itself, with its anthemic title track, which is just absolutely fantastic when you see it live and see her perform it live, and see it, especially when it's in Dublin, and I believe in some performances with the jerseys for Sheriff Street as well, there's a real feeling of community to it. Setting Sun and Cruising and tracks like that have a personal edge. It doesn't feel like it's an abstract political thing. It feels like a real community with real people with real experiences living in them. I think the title track as well has some great moments of lyricism, with talking about flashing blue lights passing by the window as a way to kind of come down from the night before. It's really interesting as well for me about this EP, the relationship it has with an album released 2 years later, Rosalia's Moto Mami. Rosalia as well, that album, which is as well is very much couched in community and family and experience. There are, in a similar way on Moto Mami, there are found sound or recordings of family members speaking to the artist herself, to Rosalia, about remembering her family, about remembering where she came from. She comes from Catalonia in Spain, as well as an area of Spain very much about community, very much about tradition. It's kind of the mirror between that and Sheriff Street and inner city Dublin. It's there, that kind of shared community kind of feeling. So I think the EP resonated in that way when it was released. You could see it in, I think there was an Academy show. I remember seeing photos of that. I remember seeing her live. I think that resonates throughout the music, and I think that resonates throughout the EP itself. It is a personal portrait of a place and a time and a community. It is honest and is true to her as a person, and is true to music. And I think that's what resonates with people. Aside from everything else, it feels like a very honest depiction of her upbringing and who she is now. I think when I interviewed her at the time, that's what struck me the most, was the authenticity of everything, that she had something to say. Again, as I said at the top of the show, I don't share an experience with Gemma Dunleavy. As I said, I grew up working class in Waterford, and that type of upbringing is very different from the type of upbringing from inner city Dublin. There are similarities, but there are differences. But one of the things I did notice was her talking about people creating stereotypes about people from those areas. I remember those stereotypes, and if you're somebody watching this who's grown up working class, you know what those stereotypes are, and you know how they can be held against you, and you know that that narrative always comes from other people. That's a very important thing, and I think that's why 5 years on, Up the Flats still resonates. The flats are now gone, but Sheriff Street once again finds itself framed as inconvenient to progress. Redevelopment, regeneration, whatever word makes it easier to forget what's literally being erased. Another set of planning renderings where people have been photoshopped out. Coded language, mixed use, built to rent, spoken over the heads of those who still live there. This is about the people who stood in the street before Phil Shannon House and watched it come tumbling down. Those who waited for the promises after Ballymun's towers fell, and who are still waiting. Beneath every crane on the skyline, there's a shadow being cast over someone's future, someone's community. Memory is an act of resistance, and that's what Gemma Dunleavy does. She makes memory loud. In her voice, you hear not just Sheriff Street, but the spaces and silences left behind, the young people who raised families with what little they had, the neighbours who became kin. Some music is about escape. This is about what we carry back with us. And so it goes. Up the Flats by Gemma Dunleavy. Yeah, as I was saying, I think the connection between this and last week's episode regarding the Celtic Tiger is an interesting one. One of the things I saw after releasing that video and the TikTok clip as well that I put up speaking about it, a lot of which I will say right now connects to this in another way, because people are going to say it, because whenever you talk about anything like this, people do say it. Once again, not to repeat myself from last week's video, but if you're going to go into the comments about this, we're like, it's the immigrants, go fuck yourself with that bullshit. Okay, I'm not going to go on a big rant about it like I did last time, but go fuck yourself. So, anyway, getting on to this. Why it connects is so many people shared with me their stories of what life was like during the recession and after, and even now for them. And there are so many different types of experiences coming. It wasn't just mine coming from Waterford, a city that during the recession saw about 20% unemployment rate after the glass factory closed, and people on the dole and like lines out the queue and all of that kind of stuff. My own experience living in Dublin on the dole, and during the recession as well, and poverty in a studio apartment. All of those things. There are a myriad of experiences, and that EP that Gemma Dunleavy released, Up the Flats, at the heart of it is another story of that, another aspect of that as we said at the beginning of the show, gets either rewritten by other people or co-opted by other people. And that working class experience gets co-opted by other people through stereotypes, through appropriation of working class experiences as well. People posing as working class while not actually having that experience behind them or speaking about it in those ways. As I said, one of the things that really struck me about my interview and the EP that would follow with Gemma, it was just how much she wanted to show the light and the dark and everything in between of her community growing up, because that's what it was. It was not just one thing. It wasn't something on newsreels. It was that the real effect, socioeconomic effect of people dealing with drug addiction, dealing with all sorts of things and violence and everything like that is a serious one. And the people behind that are people, and that the depiction of them either through the media or through other means has been dehumanizing up to that point. And adding that, Up the Flats has that sort of pride to it. Something that was depicted as this terrible thing. And you see it in the newsreels when I was kind of collecting clips for this very episode. There's this kind of almost documentarian way that they almost speak to the locals, almost speak to the people living there of like, do tell us all, kind of type thing. And I think that's really powerful. I think the way that it's kind of reclaims that identity through somebody who lived it, through somebody who experienced it, through somebody's life that was authentic to it is a powerful one. The connection as well, as I said, to Rosalia's motomami of that of community through traditional means. The music itself has a beautiful use of harp throughout it, which is just absolutely brilliant, in amongst the R&B kind of sound, which again, that connection is really there throughout the EP. And I think that's why it sticks some 5 years later. And as well, like finding out the news of these ideas or these plans to redevelop that area and seeing Gemma share things about that and saying, no, this is happening again. You're once again, the people of that area are being ploughed over in as gentrification once again kind of spreads its ugly roots throughout the city. That is a powerful thing. And a lot of the time during this, I've spoken about artists like the Fontaines and Lankum, and last week we were talking about Seema. But it's important not to forget Gemma Dunleavy's part in this of expressing the Irish experience through art and through music. I think she 5 years did it so powerfully with Up the Flats. As well, it should be said of just how many times Gemma takes a stand. Obviously, with Palestine, she's been opening for Kneecap on a few of their dates as well around Ireland and around UK. And she's stood with them and stood with Palestine. But also her use of her stage, and I remember this at Forbidden Fruit, and I think she's done it at a good few shows now. I know she's spoken about it quite often. But the death of Terence Wheelock, a young man who died in the Garda custody at almost 20 years ago, and how she has used her platform and her community and an EP and music about that to speak about this person and to speak about looking for justice for him. I will link down in the comments or down in the description of this to a far more detailed explanation of that situation. I don't want to misquote anything or misrepresent anything, and I think Gemma's shared a few things about it, so I will connect to that down in the descriptions as well. But the point being is that she has used her platform and her space to stand up for her community in more ways than one, not just redefining what that community is or how it is seen from the outside looking in, but also standing up for it in the story of Terence Wheelock as well, but also communities like Palestine. That's why I think it's such a powerful EP, even 5 years later. And that's why it means a lot even now, because the story of Up the Flats is still being told in this modern day. In 2025, we are still seeing a lot of what Seema was writing about in Euro Country now just recently. Those two songs as well are interconnected in their experiences and what they are talking about. Again, as I said at the start of the show, as somebody who grew up in Waterford, my experience is different from Seema's. Seema's is different from Gemma Dunleavy's and all around, but the similarities are there in the contrasts. What speaks to me more about it is, and the kind of the meaning behind it and everything else, is that defiance in the face of stereotypes. Stereotypes have always been something I've been very suspicious of, especially when it comes around working class people and how they are depicted and how we are depicted in media and how we're depicted on television. Even when that meaning is one of comedy and even when that meaning is one of satire, you can see people dressing up or acting in a kind of a working class way in order to make fun of it, laughing at it, or you kind of laughing at it in this kind of performative sense while kind of giving a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I think there's a lot of that goes on. And it always rubbed me up the wrong way and always angered me when I would see people, especially for comedies and stuff like that, dressing up in a certain way and acting a certain way, and this is the working class experience, this is who they are. It's been reduced and boiled down, and it's always done by people from upper class and upper middle class families, dressing up in this way and talking this way, and kind of, you know, using that as a means to laugh at it, and not to even speak of people from those communities pretending themselves to be working class and equating their experiences to the same, which itself is a problem, because working class voices will never truly be heard if it is continually hijacked by people who are themselves not working class or have not grown up with that experience. So I think the way that Gemma Dunleavy confronts it with music, confronts it with an EP and a sound that inaugurates all of those things, is relevant to 2025. And that's why I wanted to cover it on this week's show. Five years on, Up to Flats still rings out like a call across the city. Gemma Dunleavy's debut EP is a record of lived experience, of a community that has been documented more often than it's been understood. A love letter written on steel and concrete with synths, beats and voice. Gemma Dunleavy didn't just write about Sheriff Street, she wrote into it. And every track carries the cadence of a place rarely given the dignity of nuance. It's the sound of the working class Dublin refusing to be flattened, refusing to be patronised, refusing to be erased. In a city where so many are priced out, pushed out or spoken over, Up to Flats reminds us what gets lost when communities are reduced to footnotes in someone else's plan. But it also reminds us of what survives. The memory, the music, the voices. 5 years later, the cranes may have returned, but so too have the stories. Up to Flats, sung from balconies, not trading on nostalgia, its continuity, presence and its pride. And so it goes, and there it went. Gemma Dunleavy's Up the Flats turns 5. But what about you? What do you think of Gemma Dunleavy's seminal EP, Up the Flats? Do you like it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? What are your thoughts on it? What do you think about how it speaks about regentrification? What do you think what it speaks about classism in society? How it speaks about classist stereotypes? How it attacks them? How it redefines them? What do you think about Gemma as an artist? Do you have experiences seeing her live? Are there things that I didn't speak about in this episode that you think should have been covered? What do you think about Gemma's EP? And have you never heard it before? Maybe you are one of our viewers from America or the UK or further afield and you've not heard of this. How does this equate to your experience in the cities you've grown up in? I want to hear and I want to know all about it.
And I think it was just because I was honest. So that's how I have to go forward with my next project. Stuff I'm working on now is totally different, but it's soothing me soul. Hopefully that'll translate. We'll see.